The wind did not arrive with warning or rage. It came quietly, like a sigh drawn from the lungs of the mountain. The night was still, every rooftop resting under a pale shimmer of frost. Somewhere beyond the valley walls, a low hum of air passed through pine and stone, not loud enough to stir the birds, but just enough to make the torches flicker. This was the eve before forgetting. The kingdom lay asleep, wrapped in calm. From the hilltop, the citadel glowed faintly under moonlight, its towers like fingers reaching for warmth that would never return. Below, in the village, every window shimmered faint gold, each holding a life unaware of how short the night would be. Old diaries say the snow began to fall at midnight, though no one saw it start. It was not a storm that tore branches or howled down chimneys. It was a storm that whispered. Flakes drifted from the sky like dust from forgotten wings. The air itself felt heavy, as though time was slowing down to watch. In her chamber, the queen could not sleep. She rose from her bed, walked barefoot across the cold stone, and stood at her balcony. The world below was silent, too silent. She thought of omens, of rivers freezing early, of crows flying north, of strange lights seen above the mountain. Her hand trembled against the railing, not from cold, but from knowing. Down in the streets, a baker left dough to rise, promising himself he'd wake before dawn. A shepherd checked his flock and whispered a prayer to keep them warm. Children pressed their faces to frosted glass, watching the first flakes twirl. One asked his mother, "Can snow dream?" She smiled. "Maybe it dreams of flying forever." Every breath from every soul in that kingdom mingled with the falling snow, warm meeting cold, life meeting stillness. None knew that each exhale was writing the final line of their story. Imagine walking through it now. The doors stand open, candles melted into silence. A wooden bowl half filled with soup rests beside a chair that will never again creak. Pots hang untouched above extinguished fires. No footprints lead away, only layers upon layers of white. Some believe it was the work of the frost god reclaiming his realm. Others say the air turned deadly, a breath too still to sustain life. But archaeologists tell another tale, one of sudden cold, of trapped air pockets frozen mid-motion, of bodies preserved in gestures of peace. You can almost feel that silence, can't you? The ache of it, stretched between one heartbeat and the next. It is the kind of silence that doesn't end when sound returns. It lingers like breath on glass, long after the storm has gone. Close your eyes, listen to the whisper beneath your own breathing. Maybe it is the same wind, circling back through centuries, searching for the sleepers it once claimed. And tell me, softly, where are you watching from tonight? Which city holds you as you listen? What time is it there as the snow falls through your screen? Leave a comment below. Let the wind carry your words. The story of the sleeping kingdom begins not with terror, but with tenderness, a hush so deep it became eternal. Beneath that quiet, warmth turned to memory. By morning there would be no footprints, no cries, no firelight, only peace. And in that peace, a whisper still moves. Perhaps it waits for you to hear it, to remember that even silence has a voice. The morning never truly arrived. It hovered instead, a pale light caught between night and day. The horizon shimmered like glass beneath a thin veil of frost, and the air hung heavy with quiet. For miles, the snow stretched unbroken, covering the valley like a shroud drawn by invisible hands. What was once alive now rested beneath an endless white. At first glance, it could have been beauty. The way the frost caught the light, the way the wind curved through sleeping trees, but look closer, and the beauty begins to ache. No footsteps marked the road to the citadel. The banners that once swayed above its towers were now stiff, frozen in place. Even the river, once restless with current, lay still beneath a sheet of ice so clear you could see the stones waiting below, as if holding their breath. Somewhere under that glassy silence the kingdom dreamed. The snow muffled every sound, no birds, no clatter, no laughter. The frost had stolen the voices first, then the warmth, then the color. It turned red roofs to silver, brown soil to pale dust, life to stillness. And yet there was something strangely alive about it. Frost forms in patterns that mimic veins, branching, curling, pulsing faintly in the morning light. To the wandering eye, the frozen fields almost seemed to breathe. Maybe the land was not dead at all. Maybe it was only sleeping. A traveler arrived weeks later, unaware that the valley had gone silent. He came from the southern plains, following old trade routes. When he reached the edge of the pass, he dismounted, called out, and waited. No echo came back. He walked through empty gates, his boots crunching softly on the snow. Every door he passed hung slightly open, as if someone had just stepped out. But there were no signs of struggle, no collapse, no fire, just peace too perfect to make sense. He found the fountain in the town square frozen mid-splash. Water arched like crystal ribbons, trapped midair. Around it stood stone benches, draped in white lace spun by frost. He touched one, and his glove stuck to the surface. That was when he realized the silence was not absence, it was density. It pressed around him like water, thick, unyielding, ancient. For years afterward, stories would spread. Some said the people had followed a voice into the storm. Others believed the frost carried a sleeping spell, that one long breath from the mountains had lulled every living thing into eternal rest. But the truth, as historians later wrote, was colder than myth. Evidence suggests a sudden temperature drop, faster than breath could fog the air. A perfect convergence of wind and ice sealed the valley overnight. No fire could have fought it. No heartbeat could have outlasted it. Still, the traveler reported something curious, footprints, not of people, but of birds. He said they appeared for a few steps, then vanished mid-path, as though the air itself had turned to glass around them. He followed them to the edge of the forest, where trees bowed under the weight of silver. There he stopped, afraid to go further. He felt that if he spoke too loud, the frost would turn toward him and listen. He left a single mark, his initials carved into the frozen bark of an elm, before he fled. Centuries later, that tree was found, still standing, initials barely visible through layers of ice. Proof that someone had once walked through silence and lived to tell it. Frost at the edge of dawn is the closest thing to eternity we can see. It is the moment when light doesn't know whether to rise or fall. It is time holding its breath, waiting to choose direction. And if you were standing there now, what would you feel? Wonder, fear, or that strange calm that comes when the world forgets to move? Somewhere beneath that frozen hush, the kingdom's pulse still beats, slow, soft, hidden under centuries of snow. Long before the storm took its final breath, the fires in the kingdom's hearths still glowed softly, tiny suns scattered through the valley. The villagers believed that as long as one ember remained, the gods of frost would stay outside. So they fed their flames through the night, not out of fear, but out of ritual. In cottages built of stone and timber, people gathered close. The smell of smoke and bread filled the air. Shadows danced on walls like old spirits remembering warmth. A mother stitched wool by the firelight, her needle gleaming with each slow motion. A child leaned against her side, half asleep, tracing circles in the ashes with his finger. Outside, the wind brushed against the shutters like a hand searching for entry. This was the last night when stories were told aloud. A shepherd spoke of lights moving over the northern hills, green and gold like slow lightning. A blacksmith swore He had heard voices in the frozen river, whispering in a language that was both human and wind. They laughed, drank, and promised to wake early for the midwinter feast, but the firelight trembled when the door opened, and no one noticed how the cold crept in and did not leave. Across the kingdom, every hearth burned the same shade of amber. In the great hall, the queen's fire blazed high, though her gaze remained distant. The astronomer beside her watched the flame and whispered, "Fire remembers what we forget." She nodded. "Then let it remember us." They did not know that the air outside was changing. Tiny crystals began to fall from the night sky, too fine to see, too delicate to feel. But as they touched the earth, they multiplied, weaving an invisible web of frost that spread from field to forest to gate. The kingdom was being wrapped gently, like a child being tucked in for sleep. By midnight, the first fires began to dim. The wood hissed, cracked, and fell silent. One by one, the embers folded inward, glowing faintly like the eyes of fading stars. The warmth that had filled the rooms retreated into the stones, and the walls began to breathe out cold. There was no sound of alarm, no screams, only the rhythm of wind and the long exhale of burning wood. The kingdom slipped toward silence the way a candle burns down to its last sigh of smoke. When archaeologists unearthed the remains centuries later, they found hearths untouched, ashes still shaped like wings, charred logs frozen mid-collapse. Carbon traces showed that fires had gone out almost simultaneously within minutes of one another. Such precision could only come from something beyond accident. Maybe it was not death, but surrender. Maybe the people simply drifted into a dream too deep to return from, holding hands around the fire until sleep became forever. You can almost hear it, can't you? The crackle of logs softening into whispers, the breath of the room slowing until even the air seems to listen. The last hearth fires flickering like memories, small, stubborn, and beautiful in their final moments. If you were there, sitting close to that warmth, would you have stayed awake? Or would you have trusted the calm, believing that morning would still come? Some say that if you visit the ruins at winter's edge and breathe into the cold air, the frost will shimmer faintly, as though the fires still remember your breath. The warmth, after all, never truly disappears. It just waits for someone to notice. When the last ember sighed into ash, the world exhaled. The sound was too soft to hear, a whisper beneath snow, a thread of breath leaving a body that had forgotten how to wake. What remained was silence, so pure it felt alive. It moved between the houses like a slow tide, filling every space once occupied by laughter or prayer. At first, it was a kind silence, the kind that makes the air feel deeper. But soon it grew heavier, pressing against the walls, muffling even memory. If someone had spoken, their words would have fallen like feathers, swallowed by the frost before reaching another ear. The kingdom had entered a hush so complete that time itself hesitated to continue. Imagine walking through it. The village square stood untouched. Tables still held cups of wine, now frozen into crimson glass. A lute lay beside a chair, strings glistening with frost. Drapes hung still in open windows, stiff as bark. No footprints marked the snow. The silence had covered every trace of movement, a flawless shroud. The castle gates, once echoing with iron and voice, now held nothing but cold breath. Guards remained where they had stood, their armor dusted white, faces soft with peace. Their stance was neither rigid nor fallen, as if they had chosen to rest mid-watch. Some still clutched spears, their fingers fused to the wood by ice. Yet even they seemed calm, not conquered. Above them, banners that had once rippled with wind now hung frozen mid-motion, edges curled inward like the closing petals of a flower. When the first light touched them, crystals of frost caught the sun and broke it into fragments of color. For a heartbeat, the world looked alive again, every surface shimmering, the silence glowing with the memory of song. Scientists later found that the temperature that night dropped faster than any known record, a descent so sudden it defied reason. It wasn't simply winter, it was the air forgetting how to be warm. They called it an anomaly, but old myths had a different name, the breath of the sky. A wind so pure it froze not just bodies, but sound itself. Even now, the ruins bear the echo of that silence. When explorers speak near the valley, their voices flatten, absorbed by the snow. Recordings made their capture faint tones, not wind, not movement, but something that hums just beneath hearing, like a heartbeat buried in ice. Maybe silence isn't emptiness. Maybe it's the oldest sound of all, the hum of the world when everything else has stopped. In the great hall, the queen sat motionless upon her throne, her crown tilted slightly, as if in thought. The candle beside her had burned down to wax and frost, its flame caught mid-flicker. The astronomer beside her remained seated, hand outstretched toward parchment. The ink had frozen mid-stroke, spelling a word no one could decipher. When archaeologists later brushed away the layers of frost, they said the room still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. For a moment they claimed it felt as if someone was breathing nearby. If you stood there now, if you stepped into that hall and whispered a single word, would it echo? Or would it simply vanish, joining the hush that never ended? There's a certain peace in imagining it, a kingdom asleep in snow, untouched by decay, preserved by the gentlest silence the earth ever made. It is tragedy softened by grace, and perhaps deep down, that's why we listen to these stories, to feel the stillness without having to lose ourselves in it. So breathe softly wherever you are. Let the quiet rest around you for a moment. The same silence that covered that kingdom once passes by your window tonight. Before the storm sealed the valley, there was one man still awake, the royal messenger, whose duty was to carry word beyond the mountains. His name is lost to history, written only as a symbol in the frozen scroll found beside his saddle. But legend calls him the last breath of the kingdom. He left before midnight, when the snow was still soft and the moon hung low. The queen had handed him a sealed letter, bound in wax and marked with her crest. Her words were simple: if the dawn does not rise, ride toward it. No one knows if he understood her meaning, but he bowed deeply, mounted his horse, and turned toward the northern pass. Behind him, the torches along the city walls flickered faintly. The valley below shimmered with frost, 1,000 small lights glowing in the night like stars that had fallen to earth and chosen not to rise again. His horse snorted, breath steaming in the cold, hooves crunching on the frozen road. Every sound echoed too clearly, as if the air had become glass. Halfway up the mountain trail, the wind changed. What had been a gentle snow became a silent storm. Flakes no longer fell. They floated upward, spiraling in confusion. The sky and earth blended into one endless white, and the messenger could no longer tell which way led home. Still, he pressed on, guided only by the faint rhythm of his heartbeat and the memory of warmth behind him. They say he sang to keep the silence away, a low song learned from his mother about summer wheat and open fields. His voice carried only a few feet before dissolving into the storm. He rode until his fingers could no longer hold the reins. Then he dismounted, pressed his forehead to the horse's mane, and whispered something no one would ever hear. Centuries later, explorers found the remnants of his journey, a leather strap, a piece of parchment sealed in ice, and a brooch shaped like a small wing. The scroll he carried was blank, no ink, no words, only frost patterns that looked eerily like writing. Some scholars believed the cold had erased the message. Others thought it had never needed words to begin with. In his absence, the kingdom never knew what became of him. The gates froze shut, the fires dimmed, and the world fell asleep without knowing that its last messenger had already vanished into silence. But sometimes, when the wind passes through the mountain passes at dusk, it sounds like a single horse walking through snow, slow, rhythmic, unhurried. Locals say that's him still searching for dawn. What do you think he saw before he disappeared? The storm opening like a curtain of light, the valley below glowing one last time before it turned to glass. Or did he simply stop, close his eyes, and let the world fade into stillness around him? The beauty of history is not always in what we know, but in what remains unsaid. The messenger became a story because he never returned, because his silence spoke louder than his report ever could. And maybe that's why we still listen, because somewhere inside we all carry a sealed message for a dawn that may never come. So as you listen now in whatever city holds you tonight, imagine the sound of hooves fading into the snow and ask yourself quietly, if it had been you, would you have turned back or ridden toward the light? When the first explorers reached the gates centuries later, they expected ruin, collapsed towers, broken iron, the decay of time. But what they found instead were two figures standing guard, their forms untouched, preserved in ice, as if carved by the breath of eternity. The gatekeepers of the vanished kingdom still held their posts. Their armor glimmered faintly beneath layers of frost, polished by the slow patience of snow. One had his hand resting on the hilt of a sword, the other lifted as though to signal someone who never came. Faces serene, eyes closed not in fear but in quiet duty. Even the smallest details endured, the stitching on their gloves, the worn leather of their belts, the faint impression of breath turned crystal across their lips. Archaeologists later noted that both bodies stood in positions of calm readiness, no struggle, no collapse, as if they had chosen to remain upright even as the world dimmed around them. Some believed they were frozen in the instant of loyalty, a final act of service that time itself had decided to preserve. The gates behind them told the same story, massive wooden doors bound in iron, frost weaving through every crack like lace. The hinges were sealed solid, yet the emblem of the kingdom, a rising sun over crossed branches, could still be seen beneath the ice. It shimmered faintly when struck by light, gold against white, like hope refusing to fade. Villagers from distant towns spoke of dreams in which the guards still moved. They claimed to see faint light flickering in the helmets, to hear the dull thud of boots shifting in the snow. When the wind howled through the valley, some said it sounded like two voices murmuring in rhythm, keeping watch. Perhaps it's only legend, but legend, after all, is just memory wearing the mask of wonder. The scientists who studied them found traces of warmth trapped in the armor, heat signatures preserved by compressed frost. It's as if, one wrote, the bodies never learned they were supposed to die. Standing before them now, you might feel it, that faint pull between reverence and unease. These were not monuments built to honor the fallen. They were people who simply refused to fall. Their silence is not emptiness. It's devotion frozen mid-promise. Imagine the night it happened. The snow thickened, wind stilled, and everything slowed. The guards at the gate turned toward one another, maybe exchanged a look, a nod, a breath shared in cold air. Then the stillness claimed them. No sound, no pain, just peace crystallizing in motion. What remains of courage when the world stops moving? Maybe it looks like this, two figures facing eternity, still keeping watch for a dawn that never came. There's a quiet nobility in that thought. They were never named, yet they became the kingdom's last protectors, guardians of silence, sentinels of a story that outlived their people. And when the wind moves through the valley now, brushing against their armor, it makes a faint tone, a hum, low and steady. Some visitors say it sounds like breathing. Others think it's the echo of a vow that was never broken. Wherever you're listening from, imagine standing before them, snow swirling around your feet, the world utterly still. Could you hold your ground that long? Could you face forever and not move? They say the queen never feared the cold. Even as frost claimed her kingdom, she walked barefoot through her chamber, her breath weaving faint clouds in the air. The fire still burned in the hearth that night, soft gold flickering against stone walls carved with the stories of her ancestors. But her eyes were distant, fixed on something far beyond the flames. In the final hours before the silence, she dreamt, though not the kind of dream born from sleep. It was the kind that comes before death or revelation, when time folds and memory becomes prophecy. Servants who survived in distant provinces would later write that the queen had spoken strange words before nightfall, whispering of snow that hummed, of stars that trembled, of voices calling. Through light, in her dream, she stood in the great hall, alone. The banners above her shimmered like water, and the fire's glow turned silver. When she looked down, she saw the marble floor ripple like ice melting backward, showing faces beneath, the faces of her people, eyes closed, sleeping peacefully. She reached out, but every step she took left a print that froze solid behind her. A sound followed her, faint, rhythmic, steady. It was the sound of hooves, echoing through the clouds. The messenger's song, maybe, or the heartbeat of the mountain. The dream blurred time, her father's laughter, the coronation bells, the scent of summer rain. Everything returned for one last moment, circling her like ghosts that only wanted to be remembered. She looked upward. Above her, the ceiling was gone, the roof replaced by an endless, swirling sky. Snowflakes drifted upward instead of down, glowing faintly blue, and each one carried an image within it. A child, a word, a flame, a field. "Is this death?" she whispered. A voice answered soft, "Neither man nor woman, no. This is remembering." When she woke, tears had frozen on her cheeks. She called for her astronomer, but he never arrived. The candles were long dead. Only the pale glow of dawn through frost remained. Her lips moved once more, forming a question that no one recorded. Then she stood, crossed the room, and placed her crown upon the window ledge. Outside, the snow drifted endlessly, patient, soundless, holy. Later, when explorers found her chamber, they said her body was seated by the window, head turned toward the mountains. A single streak of sunlight touched her shoulder. The crown beside her was fused to the stone, gold veins running through the frost. Her expression was calm, not of sorrow, but of someone who had understood something beyond life. What do you think she saw in that final vision? Was it the kingdom breathing one last time? Or was it the earth itself, closing its eyes to rest? The queen's dream became the heart of the legend, a story that outlived stone. Every century, when the frost thickens and the wind hums low through the mountain passes, people say the same words. The queen is dreaming again. And maybe she still is. Somewhere beneath the snow, perhaps she dreams of light returning, of fires relit, of songs remembered, of footsteps breaking the hush once more. If you are listening now, close your eyes for a moment. The same wind that touched her cheek is moving through your room tonight. Breathe with it, let the silence carry her dream through you, not of endings, but of patience, for in every frozen story there's warmth waiting to return. Centuries passed before the valley gave up its secrets. When the first thaw touched the kingdom's grave, it came not with violence but with curiosity, melting layer by layer, revealing fragments of what once breathed. Archaeologists trudged through the soft snow, shovels in hand, their breath clouding the frozen air. Beneath them, history slept in crystalline silence, waiting to be touched gently awake. The ice did not release easily. Each strike of the spade echoed like a heartbeat through the hollow valley. They found the first clue near the river, a ring of blackened stone, once the base of a hearth. Inside it, ash still slept, untouched by time. Carbon dating placed it near 900 years before the age of maps. Impossible, some said. The kingdom had fallen far more recently. Yet the data held firm and the mystery deepened. One scholar described the site as a cathedral of frost. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of preservation, wooden beams as strong as the day they were cut, pottery unbroken, even strands of hair still curled as if wind had passed only moments ago. And in the silence between their discoveries, something stranger emerged. Faint hums, low frequencies that made the instruments tremble. "Listen," one of them said, pressing an ear against the ice. "It's singing." Later analysis revealed that the glacier's core carried harmonic vibrations, the same frequency recorded in certain medieval chants. Coincidence, perhaps, or memory echoing through matter. They uncovered the gates first, then the streets, and finally the great hall. Beneath the queen's chamber lay a small network of tunnels, each wall etched with symbols. Spirals, suns, and eyes carved into stone, repeating in perfect rhythm, as if drawn by someone tracing breath itself. The carvings led them to a chamber at the valley's heart, a room sealed entirely in translucent ice. Inside were hundreds of figures, perfectly preserved, faces serene, hands joined. It was not a grave. It was a gathering. Around them lay candles that had never burned, food that had never spoiled, and instruments frozen mid-song. It was as if the people of the kingdom had gathered willingly, stepping into stillness together. No signs of panic, no evidence of war. Only unity, as though they had chosen to meet the frost as one. When word spread, theories multiplied. Some said it was gas, a volcanic exhale that stole breath without pain. Others blamed sudden polar inversion or celestial dust dimming the sun. But local elders told a different story, that the kingdom had heard a call beneath the wind and answered it, that the frost was not death, but invitation. Even now, samples from that ice remain impossible to replicate. Tiny air pockets within it hold unknown isotopes, heavier than oxygen, lighter than mystery. The air inside smells faintly of cedar and honey, though nothing of that kind should have survived. Standing before those figures today, behind the glass of a modern exhibit, visitors often fall silent. There's something about their faces so calm, so human that quiets all questions. You can almost feel the echo of that night, the breath of 1,000 lives becoming stillness together. One historian described it best. It is not a tragedy we are uncovering, but a piece we no longer understand. And perhaps that's why we keep digging, not for proof of how they vanished, but for the memory of how gently they did. So tell me, if you could step into that frozen hall, stand among them, and feel the air hum around you, would you be afraid? Or would you listen, because beneath the ice, even now, something continues to sing? When the explorers reached the great hall, they expected emptiness. Instead, they found a feast, a table stretching the length of the chamber, covered in plates, goblets, and untouched bread that crumbled like snow beneath their gloves. Candles still stood upright, wicks blackened but whole. Bowls of fruit gleamed under frost, skins translucent as glass. It looked as if the meal had only just been set. At the head of the table sat 12 figures, frozen in the act of gathering. One hand held a cup midair, another reached toward a loaf. A musician's bow hovered inches from his strings. The fire had died long ago, yet the air still carried the faint smell of spice and wine, ghostly traces of warmth that refused to vanish. Scientists called it a suspended moment. They believed a sudden drop in temperature had halted decay instantly, freezing not only flesh but time itself. To them it was data. To poets, it was divinity, the final supper of a people who had chosen to rest together. Among the remains lay things too strange for record: a carved wooden flute still glossy from use, a child's toy shaped like a bird, and a book of prayers written in a language no one could decipher. The script spiraled inward, ending in a single circle of ink, as though meaning itself had folded in upon silence. When light touched the hall through cracks in the ceiling, it refracted through the frost, filling the room with gentle color, blues, ambers, and faint rose golds. The frozen faces seemed to glow. Some smiled, others simply looked at peace. One historian wrote, "They did not flee death. They prepared a place for it." It was a haunting thought that the kingdom's end was not chaos but ceremony. The utensils were arranged perfectly, food evenly portioned. Even the salt was scattered in deliberate arcs. Someone had cared for beauty until the very last moment. The order of the meal suggested ritual, perhaps an offering, or a farewell to the gods of warmth. When the archaeologists attempted to remove the objects, the temperature sensors dropped sharply. Equipment froze mid-function, lights flickered. One recorder captured a faint melody, a hum beneath human hearing, soft and slow, pulsing through the ice like a heartbeat. Later, sound engineers found that the frequency matched the resonant pitch of human breath. It was as if the room itself was exhaling. Locals who visited the site began to leave offerings of their own loaves, candles, small carved figures of their ancestors. "They are still eating," an elder said once. "They are waiting for us to join them when the frost comes again." But perhaps that is the lesson the feast wished to teach, that endings need not be hunger, that stillness can be abundance. The people of the sleeping kingdom did not die reaching for survival. They ended with gratitude, hands open, hearts calm. If you could sit at that table, surrounded by silence made holy by time, what would you say? Would you apologize to history for forgetting? Or would you whisper thanks for showing that even the end can be tender? Outside, the snow drifted softly past the broken windows, catching the light and falling like ash from a slow, burning star. Inside, the feast waited, patient as eternity. In the hallways of the citadel, where frost turned every step into an echo, they found candles, hundreds of them. Some still upright in brass holders, others toppled and fused into the floor. Their wax had frozen mid-drip, forming small rivers that glistened like marble veins. None were burned out completely. Each wick was half consumed, caught in a moment between light and darkness. The archaeologists couldn't explain it. If the kingdom had perished in an instant, how had the flames continued long enough to melt and freeze in such delicate patterns? It was as if the candles had kept burning after time itself had stopped, as though light had refused to accept the end. Every corridor told the same quiet story. A candle flickering on a windowsill, its last glow reflected in the frost. Another at the foot of a staircase, surrounded by faint footprints that led nowhere. The air still carried the faint scent of tallow and smoke, soft as a memory whispering through centuries. In one chamber, a small shrine stood untouched, 3 candles, each carved with symbols, spirals, stars, branches. Scholars later traced them to an ancient tradition of guarding light. When disaster loomed, every home would leave a flame burning for those lost in darkness, a signal for the soul to find its way home. Perhaps these were the kingdom's last prayers, not for salvation, but for remembrance. When the explorers relit one of the preserved wicks, the flame bloomed instantly, steady and blue. No wind touched it, no draught disturbed its shape, its breathing. One of them murmured, though no one could say what that meant. The flame flickered higher, then lower, as if responding to their heartbeat. For a few moments, the hall felt alive again. The frost glowed gold, and the silence seemed to lean closer, watching. Then, as quickly as it began, the flame dimmed and vanished, not extinguished, but absorbed into the air, as though the light had decided to rest again. Some believed it was chemical, a spark trapped in ancient air pockets. Others called it divine memory. But all who witnessed it felt the same quiet ache, the sense that the kingdom was still trying to speak, not through words, but through warmth. In the queen's chamber they found one final candle placed on the sill beside her frozen crown. Its wax was untouched, as if waiting. A single wick unlit, beside it an inscription carved faintly into stone: "Light does not die, it only forgets where to shine." Those words became the anthem of the excavation, printed on journals, whispered among crews during night shifts. And every evening, as darkness crept through the valley, one of them would light a candle at camp, letting its glow spill softly across the snow. You can imagine the sight, a single flame surrounded by endless white, fragile yet unyielding. Perhaps that is how the kingdom wished to be remembered, not by its silence, but by its stubborn light. If you close your eyes right now, you might see that flicker too, a small flame hovering in the stillness of your thoughts. What if it's the same one? What if the candles that burned alone were never truly alone at all? The mountain above the kingdom had always been silent. It was the spine of the world, ancient and unmoving, a gray giant asleep beneath its own crown of ice. For centuries, people believed it was their guardian, a god that watched over the valley and breathed out winter only to remind them of humility. But when the kingdom vanished, that same mountain became the first suspect. The earliest explorers who scaled its slopes reported something uncanny: pockets of warmth beneath the ice, air that shimmered faintly, pulsing as if alive. Instruments flickered, compasses spun. It was as though the mountain itself was exhaling, sending invisible waves into the valley below. Geologists later found vast hollow chambers deep within its core, filled with ancient gas and compressed air older than civilization itself. One vent opened directly above the lost kingdom's heart. A perfect lung, one scientist wrote, breathing cold instead of fire. The theory was simple yet haunting. A sudden release of this trapped breath could have swept through the valley in a single night, displacing oxygen, freezing moisture midair, stopping time in its tracks, not death by war nor magic, but by the mountain remembering how to breathe. And yet, science alone could not explain the precision. How every flame, every step, every heartbeat had halted at once. How serenity, not chaos, had settled upon the people. It was as though the mountain's breath had not destroyed them, but lulled them into sleep. Ancient texts discovered later hinted at a ritual, the night of returning silence. It spoke of appeasing the mountain spirit, of gathering light to feed the frost before spring's first thaw. The last recorded occurrence matched the season of the kingdom's disappearance. Perhaps they had sought harmony, not survival, offering themselves as the mountain's final lullaby. Imagine it, thousands of candles flickering along the ridges, priests whispering prayers in the snow, the queen raising her crown toward the cold sky. The wind shifts, the earth hums, and then stillness, the valley entering a single, perfect breath. Some claim that even today, if you stand near the glacier's edge and listen long enough, you can hear that breath still moving through the stone, slow, deep, almost human. Climbers describe it as a low vibration in the chest, like hearing your own heartbeat from outside your body. It's said to make the air shimmer, to thicken the silence around you until you feel the weight of centuries pressing close. One mountaineer left a note at his campsite before disappearing into a snowstorm. It read, "The mountain is not asleep, it is dreaming." His body was never found, but his words endure, etched into the foundation of myth, and perhaps he was right. Maybe the mountain dreams in cycles. Once every 1,000 years, it exhales, reshaping what lies below. Maybe the kingdom's disappearance wasn't tragedy at all, but transformation, a merging of breath and stone, a return to stillness. Standing at that height, the wind feels like time itself brushing past your face. The cold bites softly, almost tender. You realize how small a life truly is beside a thing that measures in ages. If you could hear the mountain's breath tonight, steady, deep, eternal, would you listen in awe or fear? Or would you close your eyes and breathe with it, matching rhythm for just a moment, until you can no longer tell whose breath is whose? Long after the storm had faded into legend, a single scroll changed everything. It was found sealed within the library ruins, a chamber so deep beneath the citadel that even the frost had hesitated to reach it. The wax seal bore the mark of the royal chronicler, a quill crossed over a sun. The scholars who discovered it called it the last hand of the kingdom. The parchment inside was fragile, almost translucent, but the ink had not faded. The script began in perfect order, accounts of the harvest, weather, trade. But halfway through, the tone shifted, the writing became uneven, hurried, lines broke mid-thought. And at the center of the page, written 3 times in darker ink, were the words, "The white hour is coming." No one knew what the phrase meant. To some, it described the storm, the instant when snow and sky merged into one blinding light. To others, it was spiritual, a symbol of transcendence, the hour when life dissolved into stillness. The final entry was unfinished. The quill had stopped mid-stroke, a droplet of ink frozen just above the paper. Even under magnification, the droplet held its form, refusing to fall. Time itself seemed to have halted there, caught in a single act of storytelling that never found its end. In later centuries, linguists discovered faint imprints beneath the writing, as if the chronicler had pressed too hard, etching invisible letters into the parchment. When examined under soft light, those ghost words appeared. "We are not gone. We are remembered." Historians debated whether the phrase was deliberate or accident, perhaps a tremor of hand, perhaps divine insistence. But for those who held the scroll, there was no doubt. It felt alive. The ink shimmered faintly when warmed by touch, and the smell of cedar, the same found in the queen's chamber, lingered between its folds. Who was this chronicler? Records mention a man named Elian of Frostmere, a poet turned historian, chosen for his steady hand and quiet soul. He was known to walk the castle at night, recording not wars or conquests, but dreams and whispers. His journals described the breath of winter as a living thing, the hush between bells as the sound of eternity practicing. Perhaps he alone sensed what was coming. Perhaps the white hour was not a warning, but a promise. In the museum that now houses his final scroll, a plaque reads, "He did not write the end, he simply stopped. Visitors often stand before the glass in silence, watching the ink shimmer faintly beneath controlled light. Some say the droplet still moves when no one is looking, rising, then falling, endlessly repeating the moment before the end. If you were Elian, would you have kept writing as the world vanished around you, or would you have set down your quill, accepting that some stories are meant to remain unfinished? There is a strange comfort in knowing that the last act of an entire civilization was not violence or despair, but writing. The attempt to be remembered. Maybe that's what all stories are. Candles lit against the inevitable snow. They say death is a kind of silence, but in the kingdom beneath the snow, it was not silence that arrived. It was sleep. Gentle, unhurried, merciful. The final act of a world that had grown too beautiful, too fragile to keep burning. When the last candles dimmed, a stillness settled that was not cruel. It felt like a hand pressing softly over the eyes of the earth. The wind stopped, the fire sighed, and all the tiny noises of life, the rustle of cloth, the creak of timber, the turning of breath, folded into one long inhale that never became an exhale. The people didn't fall where they stood. They rested. Families curled together beside their hearths. Lovers leaned shoulder to shoulder, heads touching. A mother's arm remained around her child, their faces peaceful, as though waiting for dawn. There was no fear on any of them, only the calm of those who had finally been allowed to rest. Scientists later marveled at how uniform it all was. No sign of struggle, no violence. They did not die in terror, one wrote. They drifted. Maybe something in the air made their hearts slow, their minds quiet. Maybe the mountain's breath, that strange exhalation of ancient air, held within it a lullaby instead of poison. Across centuries, poets reimagined the moment. Some said the kingdom simply dreamed itself into stone, a collective sleep so deep it forgot to end. Others believed they stepped into another rhythm of time, one heartbeat stretched into eternity. In certain lights, when snow falls over the ruins, it's said you can see faint outlines beneath the surface, fingers, faces, the shimmer of forms just under the ice. Not haunting but harmonious, imagine it, an entire civilization choosing to rest, no panic, no screams. Just an exhale and surrender. Could that be what peace truly looks like? The chronicler's final entry, discovered decades later, hinted at this very thought. We do not fall, we drift. His quill had left a faint mark below those words, a curve unfinished, like the first stroke of a smile. Perhaps this is why the archaeologists who studied the valley never felt dread there. They said it was quiet, yes, but never empty. The air carried something else, an awareness, a presence, like the soft hum in the chest when you remember a song but can't recall its name. In that hush, it's easy to imagine that the kingdom isn't gone. It's simply paused, the pulse of its people slowed to match the mountain's heartbeat. Maybe somewhere beneath the frost, they still dream of the river flowing again, of bells echoing across stone streets, of firelight on skin. And maybe when we sleep, a part of us joins them. Each night, as our breathing slows and the world fades from our edges, perhaps we step into their endless dream for just a moment, standing among them in the quiet glow of eternal winter. If so, then none of them are truly lost. They are the rhythm behind our stillness, the warmth behind our rest. They are the story that continues every time a heart slows, every time a flame bends low, every time the world grows quiet enough to listen. When sleep became forever, it wasn't an ending. It was a return to peace, to patience, to the space between heartbeats where all stories begin again. Long after the snow had quieted, when the kingdom was nothing more than a whisper on the wind, a man returned to the valley, an old shepherd who had once led his flocks across those same frozen. Hills, he had been away when the white hour came, tending his sheep beyond the western ridge. When he came back months later, spring was already brushing the mountain with thaw. The path he followed was half buried, carved by meltwater and time, the once familiar trail wound between ridges of ice that gleamed like glass, reflecting the sky's pale blue shimmer. His staff knocked softly against the frozen ground. Each sound echoed too far, as if the air itself were hollowed out. He called out as he walked, not in fear but in hope, "Is anyone here?" He asked the valley, voice breaking the hush like a stone skipping across still water. No answer came, only the sigh of wind moving through empty gates. His sheep bleated behind him, their voices small against the silence. When he reached the outskirts of the village, the shepherd stopped. Everything was as he remembered, and yet not. Doors hung open but untouched, fields shimmered with frost flowers, wells were sealed in glass. He stepped into his old home and found the firewood stacked neatly, the table set for supper. On the chair by the hearth lay a shawl his wife had been weaving, needles still threaded, pattern unfinished. He sat in that chair for a long time. No tears came. The silence did not ask for grief. It asked for understanding. He felt it then, the peace of the place, the strange calm that lived in the air. The people had not vanished in pain. They had gone somewhere the world could not follow. The shepherd spent days wandering through the village, leaving small marks of life wherever he went. He fed a few surviving birds, set candles upright, whispered blessings into the empty houses. When night fell, he climbed the hill overlooking the citadel and lit a fire, not to warm himself, but to let the smoke rise. "So they'll know someone came back," he said softly. The fire burned steady through the night, its light flickering over frost like stars returning to earth. From the ridge he could see the valley glowing faintly, as if the snow remembered how to reflect warmth again. In the morning he gathered a handful of frost and pressed it between his palms. "Rest easy," he whispered. "I'll carry the story." Then he turned and walked away. Years later, villagers from nearby settlements found the place where he had built his final fire. The ashes were still there, frozen mid-glow. Beside them lay his staff, half buried in snow, and carved into the rock below were the words, "They are sleeping, not gone." Those 6 words became a prayer for centuries, repeated by travelers and told to children before sleep. The shepherd's quiet act of remembrance kept the memory of the sleeping kingdom alive, passed down like a flame hidden in cupped hands. If you stood on that same ridge now, you might still feel it, the warmth beneath the wind, the hum beneath the silence. The shepherd's fire may be long gone, but its light still travels, flickering through time. And perhaps, if you listen softly tonight, you might hear him too, a voice in the distance calling through the frost, not in sorrow, but in gentle devotion, "I came back." Beneath the white valley, beneath the silence, a river waited. It had always been there, a hidden artery running through the kingdom's bedrock, older than the castle itself. When the frost came, it froze solid near the surface, but deep below it still moved, slowly, patiently. Carrying whispers from a world that refused to die, the first explorers to detect it did not believe what they found. Instruments trembled, heat signatures flickered under meters of frozen stone. "There's motion," one said. Not melt movement. When they drilled through, the sound that emerged was not the roar of water, but a murmur, low, melodic, like breath weaving through glass. The river was warm to the touch. Steam rose faintly where the drill met the flow. And in that warmth, the team found traces of life, microscopic algae, impossibly preserved, glowing faintly green under ultraviolet light. "Something remembers," whispered the lead researcher. his voice echoing through the ice tunnel. Further down the current, they discovered more fragments of fabric, grains of ash, a carved amulet shaped like a spiral. Each piece was caught in slow motion, drifting beneath the surface as though time itself had thickened to honey. The river had become a keeper of relics, a slow-moving memory that carried the essence of the lost. Legends later called it the Soul Stream. They said it gathered what could not rest: songs, breath, warmth, and carried them quietly through the mountain's heart, waiting for spring. At night, the researchers would stand above the opening, lanterns casting light into the hollow below. The air that rose carried a strange scent, cedar and smoke, faintly sweet, like the ghost of firewood. "It's the kingdom breathing," said one of them, and no one disagreed. Some theories claimed geothermal heat kept the river alive. Others whispered that it was the last pulse of the people, the slow, steady rhythm of 1,000 hearts still dreaming. Either way, it flowed on, untouched by decay or silence. When they recorded the sound, it wasn't what they expected. Not a rush, not a trickle. It was music, a resonant hum with harmonic layers, too deliberate to be random. Sound engineers later matched its pattern to the rhythm of human respiration. The river, it seemed, was breathing. Visitors who come to the valley today can still hear it on quiet mornings when fog curls low and the wind pauses. A hum beneath the feet, faint but steady, like a heartbeat deep within the mountain. Children are told that if they whisper their names into the snow above it, the river will remember them and carry their echoes forward. Maybe that's true. Maybe the past is not gone. It's just moving slowly, too deep for us to see. The kingdom may have slept, but the river beneath it kept dreaming, bearing witness beneath centuries of silence. And perhaps, if one day the ice gives way completely, the valley will wake not with thunder, but with the soft return of water, bringing stories home. There was a dawn that should have risen, a morning promised by every rhythm of time. But it never arrived. When the sky lightened over the valley, it stopped halfway, caught in an endless prelude of pale blue and silver. The sun hovered just below the mountains, its light diffused through frost like breath behind glass. Daylight came, but not the kind that warms. It lingered cold, eternal, like a memory refusing to fade. For the explorers who later stood there, it was disorienting. Clocks worked, but shadows didn't move. The light stayed still, suspended in its own reflection. Cameras struggled to focus. Digital sensors flickered between morning and night. The entire valley existed in a perfect balance of neither not dawn, not dusk, as if the world itself couldn't bear to disturb the kingdom's sleep. The scientists called it photonic inversion, an anomaly caused by ice crystals refracting sunlight across the valley's unique shape. But even they admitted it behaved like something aware, bending light with intention, holding it steady, guarding the ruins beneath. To poets, it was simpler. They called it the daylight that waits. Imagine walking through that glow, air bright but not warm, every snowflake glinting like powdered glass. You'd see your reflection on the frost, yet cast no shadow. Every surface shines softly, every breath feels eternal. It's beautiful, but in a way that aches, as though the world forgot how to move forward. One researcher described it perfectly. It feels like standing inside a held breath. In the Queen's Hall, where the sun should have poured through broken windows, the light instead rippled, moving in silent waves, illuminating the frozen banquet, the guards, the crown. It was as if the morning came searching, found what it sought, and decided to stay. Locals who visit the site tell stories of strange phenomena: watches slowing, voices echoing too long, birds turning away mid-flight. Some swear that under certain angles, You can see faint figures in the brightness, people outlined in gold mist, their faces calm, as if they're waiting for permission to awaken. But maybe it's not haunting. Maybe it's grace, the sun's final kindness. Perhaps it refused to rise because it couldn't bear to leave them in darkness. When you stand at the ridge at dawn, the world glows pale and quiet. Your heartbeat slows. Even your thoughts seem to soften. And in that stillness, you realize the daylight isn't missing. It's simply resting too, caught in the same gentle eternity as the people below. What if this light is a bridge between worlds, the place where memory and matter meet, the glow that lingers after everything else has ended? Maybe one day it will rise fully. Maybe the kingdom will wake with it. But until then, the sun keeps its vigil, hovering patiently over the frozen roofs, its warmth locked in silence, its love unspent. So if you ever find yourself there, stand still, let the light wrap around you, feel how soft eternity can be when it chooses to stay. Long after the snow had claimed the valley, when the world above had forgotten its name, there came travelers from nearby mountains who spoke of strange children seen wandering through morning fog. They were not ghosts, they insisted, not pale illusions or tricks of ice, but living beings, small and quiet, walking barefoot through the mist. The first account came from a hunter. He said he saw a group of them near the frozen river at dawn. Their clothes were woven from pale fiber, their hair white as frost, their eyes reflecting the sky. When he called out, they turned toward him but did not answer. Then the fog rose higher, and they were gone. He found no footprints where they'd stood, only a faint warmth in the snow, as though the earth had briefly remembered them. The villagers called them the fog-born. Some said they were the children of the sleeping kingdom, spirits, perhaps, of those who had dreamed so long that the mist took their shape. Others believed they were survivors, descendants who had adapted to the frost, living quietly in the unseen folds of the valley, moving between worlds. When archaeologists returned decades later, they dismissed the tales. Yet strange evidence followed, small handprints preserved in thawed patches, child-sized garments woven with materials unknown to modern science, and bones too small, too perfect, calcified, not by age but by stillness. DNA tests showed nothing, no match, no origin, as though they belonged to time itself. In one rare encounter, a hiker filmed faint shapes moving through low fog, silhouettes of children holding hands, their outlines glowing faintly with reflected light. The footage lasted less than a minute before dissolving into static. Scientists argued it was refraction. Poets said it was memory playing at mercy. But to those who live near the valley's edge, the children are something else entirely, caretakers of the quiet. They say that when fog rolls down the mountains and brushes against your window, it's them passing by, keeping the silence safe. If you leave a candle burning through the night, the flame will flicker twice, once for them, once for the kingdom that sleeps. Some even claim to have heard them singing, low voices that drift like lullabies through the mist. Not eerie, not sorrowful, gentle, the kind of song that mothers hum to children who cannot sleep, or that the earth might hum to itself when it remembers what warmth feels like. One old woman told a story of walking near the ruins at dawn and feeling a small hand take hers. She said the touch was neither cold nor warm, but steady. They wanted to show me something. She whispered, not death, stillness. They wanted me to know it isn't so bad. Perhaps the children are symbols, the valley's dreams made visible, the embodiment of all that lingers when memory refuses to fade. Or perhaps they're real, the quiet proof that life never truly ends. It just changes shape, learning to walk softly through the fog. If you ever visit the valley and the mist begins to gather, don't run. Listen. You might hear laughter just beyond sight, the light patter of feet, or the echo of a lullaby too ancient to name. And if something brushes your hand, don't be afraid. It's only the children of the fog, reminding you to tread gently through time. Every kingdom leaves behind a shape, a line on parchment, a name written beside a river, a border drawn in ink. But when the sleeping kingdom vanished, cartographers were left with an impossible absence. The valley still existed, of course, carved deep between the mountains, yet no one dared to name it. On maps, it became a blank space, a wound in the paper. The first man to try and redraw it was a scholar named Arvin of Callanford. He was a perfectionist, the kind of man who measured time by candle drips, who saw geography as an act of devotion. When he learned of the lost valley, he felt compelled to restore it. He studied old records, pieced together fragments of trade routes, and drew the kingdom's boundaries with careful precision. But each time he inked the map, the valley's outline blurred. The parchment buckled slightly, as if repelling the mark. After the third attempt, he wrote in his journal, "It will not stay still. The land itself resists being remembered." He tried again, changing tools, inks, even languages. He drew from memory, from rumor, from dreams, but the result was always the same. The valley faded. The mountain lines melted back together. The space where the kingdom once lived refused containment. In time, the mapmaker became obsessed. He began to see the valley in his sleep, a place neither frozen nor thawed, its rivers pulsing beneath glass, its towers glowing faintly with blue light. Each night he dreamed of walking its streets, tracing symbols in frost, whispering the names of the forgotten. Each morning he awoke with the same phrase written unconsciously on his palm, "Do not chart what still breathes." When his apprentices found him one spring morning, Arvin was gone. Only his maps remained, blank sheets stacked neatly. A single candle burned down beside them. On the wall above his desk, carved into the plaster with his compass point, was a single circle. No borders, no landmarks, only a shape, the mark of a world that refused definition. Centuries later, historians rediscovered his journals. His sketches were studied, scanned, redrawn, but still the valley would not hold its form. Digital renderings glitched, GPS coordinates scrambled, drones failed mid-flight. Even the satellites seemed to lose signal over the area, as if light itself bent politely around its memory. The mapmakers who followed called it the blank meridian. They whispered that Arvin's regret was not failure, but understanding that some places are meant to remain unnamed, sacred through omission. And maybe that's true, for what is a map, if not an attempt to own the world with ink? And what is memory, if not a map of things we can't stop losing? The sleeping kingdom, perhaps, resisted being drawn because it was never lost. It was only changed. It lived in breath, in ice, in story. And how can you chart something that still moves in the heart of those who remember? If you look at certain maps today, you'll find a faint irregularity between the northern ridges, a soft curve with no name, marked only by an empty white space. Some say that when you trace your finger over it, the paper feels colder. That is where the kingdom sleeps, not erased, but resting between coordinates, beyond the reach of compasses, remembered only by silence and snow. And somewhere, perhaps, Arvin still dreams, his ink finally still, his lines finally at peace, his regret replaced by the understanding that some worlds are not meant to be mapped, only felt. Before the frost claimed the kingdom, there had been bells, hundreds of them, bronze, silver, and iron, strung through towers, markets, and temple roofs. They marked each hour, each prayer, each harvest. The kingdom's mornings began with their song, soft and layered, echoing from hill to hill. Even shepherds miles away could tell the time by the melody of the wind. When silence descended, those bells fell quiet. But they did not fall, they remained frozen midway, tongues sealed by ice. For centuries no one heard them. Until, one late winter afternoon, a team of climbers ascending the western ridge reported something extraordinary, the sound of faint, distant ringing. Not thunder, not avalanche, but music. It came without rhythm, without pattern, a sound half swallowed by snow. Yet it was unmistakably human, the resonance of metal struck by wind, traveling across the valley in long, ghostly notes. They followed it to the ruins of a tower where frost clung like lace to every beam. Inside, they found a single bell suspended in perfect balance, unmoved by decay. Its rope had long since crumbled, but when the wind pressed through the hollow space, the bell sang. The tone was low, almost mournful, but within it lived something else, tenderness, maybe, or memory. As though the air itself had learned the old songs and was still trying to play them. Later, sound engineers recorded the resonance. The frequencies matched patterns known in medieval tuning systems, the same harmonic intervals used in cathedral hymns. It's impossible, one said. The wind doesn't compose in scales. But the recording proved otherwise. Nature was remembering music. The villagers who live nearest to the valley now call it the Choir of Frost. On certain nights when the air is still and the moon lies low, the wind threads itself through the towers, awakening the bells one by one. No two performances are the same. Some ring clear as glass, others hum faintly beneath the snow. For the locals, it is not haunting, it is holy. They leave small offerings at the valley's edge, ribbons, feathers, bits of silver wire, anything that moves when the wind passes. So the sound doesn't travel alone, they say. Historians believe the bells were tuned deliberately to the geography, placed where the air could move freely between mountain passes. The kingdom had built its architecture like an instrument, designed to sing with the wind. In that way, perhaps, it never stopped speaking. Imagine standing there now, at twilight, as the first note drifts through the frost. It doesn't echo outward, it folds inward, wrapping around your chest, trembling like a memory trying to surface. For a heartbeat, it feels like someone is calling your name from centuries ago. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe the bells aren't crying for what was lost. Maybe they're welcoming what remains. Maybe they're singing not to the past, but to anyone who still listens. Because even after the fires died, after the ink froze, after time itself fell still, the wind remembered the melody. And that is how the kingdom survived. So, the next time you hear a faint sound carried on cold air, pause. Don't call it coincidence. Let it move through you. The bells are still ringing, and somewhere the frost is listening. Centuries after the white hour, when the story of the sleeping kingdom had already turned to myth, a group of wanderers set out to find it. They came from the south, guided by half legends and songs. Farmers, healers, monks, and children carried on shoulders. They called themselves the last pilgrims, though none knew what last truly meant. They traveled for months, following the traces of rumor, the scent of cedar in the wind, the echo of bells across empty plains, the shimmer of cold light beneath the moon. When they finally reached the valley's edge, the mountain greeted them with stillness. No storm, no roar, just silence so vast it felt alive. They built campfires that refused to burn bright. The air ate the flames, leaving only pale smoke curling into the dusk. It's not angry, their leader whispered, it's listening. In the morning they descended, torches in hand, wrapped in furs and prayers. The snow was smooth as glass. They saw the shapes of houses beneath the surface, the faint outline of towers. The valley was not dead, only paused, like a painting between brushstrokes. When they reached the heart of the ruins, the pilgrims stopped before the great hall. The entrance yawned wide, rimmed with frost that glittered like jewels. Inside, everything shimmered with a faint blue glow. The queen still sat by the window, her crown fused to stone, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon. Some fell to their knees, others wept quietly. The youngest, a girl with hair the color of autumn wheat, walked forward and placed her hand against the ice. "They're sleeping," she said softly. "They're not cold, they're dreaming." The monks began to sing then, not hymns of conquest, but of remembrance. The sound rose gently, weaving through the hall, echoing through the frozen rafters. It filled the space between the still figures and made the frost shimmer like living breath. For the first time in ages, the silence shifted, not broken, but softened. They stayed for 3 nights, lighting candles across the ruins. The flames burned low and steady, refusing to flicker. The valley glowed faintly in reply, as if recognizing the warmth. On the final dawn, the leader wrote a single line in his journal. "We came too late for life, but not for love." When the pilgrims left, they took nothing, no relics, no souvenirs. They only carried stories. And as they walked away, snow began to fall again, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they were made. Those who returned to the south spoke gently of what they had seen, not of death, not of ghosts, but of beauty held still in time. "It was like kneeling at the edge of the world," one said, "and realizing the world was kind." Today, the descendants of those pilgrims still return each generation. They bring candles, songs, and silence. They do not ask for answers, they only listen. Some claim the air hums a little louder when they arrive. Others swear the frost glows softer, as though the kingdom remembers the ones who remembered it. Perhaps love, too, can travel across centuries, unhurried, unstoppable, a pilgrim of its own kind. When the ice began to thin, and centuries of silence melted into slow song, the archaeologists uncovered what the frost had guarded best, the people themselves. Not scattered, not broken, but resting as if time had chosen mercy. The first body they found lay beside the old fountain, hands folded, face tilted toward the sky. Around it, hundreds more, arranged in small circles, families, friends, lovers, each skeleton intact, every rib and finger preserved beneath the mineral glow of centuries. They had not been buried, they had simply stayed. One scientist knelt beside a child's remains, brushing frost gently from the bones. He said later that it felt wrong to call them relics. They were too familiar, too alive. It's as if, he whispered, they're waiting for something. Tests revealed impossible preservation. Traces of skin proteins remained, and in several skulls, fragments of hair still clung to bone. DNA sequenced cleanly, more complete than any ancient find before. "It's as though death never quite finished its work," wrote the lead researcher. "They were not claimed by decay, they were claimed by patience. Each excavation became a ritual. No loud machines, no harsh lights. The team worked in silence, using candles instead of lamps, speaking in low tones out of respect. They described it as excavating sleep. When they lifted the queen's body from her chamber, her crown remained fused to her hand. The bones of her fingers were curved delicately around it, like someone holding onto a dream. In her ribs, they found a pendant shaped like a seed, perfectly round, still polished. Botanists confirmed it was a species extinct for hundreds of years. and yet, within its shell, traces of life remained. That seed, more than any artifact, changed everything. It became a symbol, the idea that even in the longest winter, something remembers how to bloom. Religious scholars called the valley sacred ground. Scientists called it a time anomaly. But to those who stood there, kneeling among bones that seemed to glow under the soft thawing light, it was simpler, proof that even endings can be gentle. When the team finally closed the site for the season, they left a small plaque near the fountain. It read, "Do not wake them. They are dreaming for us." If you stood there now, with snow melting around your boots and water beginning to flow again through the old channels, you might feel it, the hum beneath your feet, the whisper through your breath. The valley doesn't mourn, it remembers, patiently, endlessly, lovingly. And maybe that's all any of us are, bones waiting for someone, somewhere, to listen. This story of the sleeping kingdom did not end in the snow. It lived on in the warmth of firelight. Centuries after the valley fell silent, wanderers carried fragments of its memory like glowing embers across the mountains. In small villages, deep forests, and lonely inns, people began to whisper the tale once more, not as history, but as comfort. It began simply. A traveler would light a fire, draw others close, and say, "Have you heard of the place where sleep became forever?" The flames would dance, shadows flickering like ghosts listening from the walls, and then the story would unfold, slow, rhythmic, a lullaby dressed in words. The listeners always fell quiet when the teller reached the part about the queen, her final dream. The crown fused to frost, the candle beside her that never burned down. No matter how many times it was told, that image never lost its power. It wasn't tragedy they heard in it, but tenderness, the idea that even endings can be beautiful if met with grace. The storytellers changed the details over time. Some said the frost was a spell cast to protect the kingdom until humanity learned gentleness again. Others believed the people beneath the ice were not asleep, but dreaming the world we live in now, our lives, our voices, our fires. "We are their story," one old woman would whisper, eyes glinting in the glow. "We are what they imagined before resting." The legend became ritual. Each winter's end, families gathered around their hearths and left one chair empty, one bowl untouched, one candle burning alone. Children asked why, and the elders would smile. It's for them, so they know they're not forgotten. In this way, the silence of the kingdom became the song of the living. It taught people that peace could survive even after loss, that warmth could travel further than flame. The story became a shelter, not for answers, but for hearts that needed rest. Scribes began writing new versions of it, illuminated with gold and blue ink, the same colors the archaeologists had found in the frozen murals beneath the castle. Artists painted the queen's last dawn, poets wrote verses about the bells that sang without hands, and sculptors carved the two frozen guards who had never left their posts. The legend was no longer about sorrow, it had become about devotion. By the time the tale reached the cities of the south, it had changed again. Scholars debated whether it was myth or history, but even they, with all their logic and light, found themselves speaking softer when recounting it. Something about the story resisted analysis. It demanded reverence. And so, by firelight, humanity carried the kingdom forward, not on maps or in monuments, but in the quiet exchange between voice and listener, between warmth and wonder. When you hear it tonight, told through my voice, perhaps your room becomes a little like theirs once was, walls glowing with gold, air soft with stillness, the old kingdom breathing again through. Story, if you are listening near a flame, watch it for a moment. The fire flickers not because it dies, but because it remembers the wind. And somewhere across time, I like to think a frozen queen smiles. Her story finally warmed back into motion, her dream still traveling through tongues and sparks and breath. The kingdom sleeps still, but its tale burns bright, carried by every storyteller who refuses to let silence win. In the years that followed the rediscovery of the frozen valley, debates raged in cities and halls of learning. Was the kingdom's fate a tragedy or a mercy? To the scientists it was an anomaly, to the faithful a miracle. Yet among all who stood within that still air, most felt something beyond words, a quiet understanding that what had happened was not punishment, but grace. Death, they realized, is rarely this kind. No fear, no pain, no destruction, only sleep. The kind that covers the body like snow, not to bury, but to preserve. The kind that feels like rest after a long day, not erasure. In the valley, you could feel it even centuries later, that peace. The wind moved differently there, soft as breath between lovers. Birds avoided the place, not out of dread, but reverence. When fog rolled down the ridges, it never settled heavy. It drifted gently, like a curtain closing over a story already told. Those who stayed too long sometimes dreamed strangely. They saw themselves walking through the old streets, past the frozen gates and silent bells, their own footsteps leaving no trace. They heard faint laughter, smelled smoke, and felt warmth where none existed, and when they awoke, tears came without sadness. It was beautiful, they'd whisper, they're still alive in the calm. It was then that the phrase took root, the sleep that spared them. It appeared in books, prayers, and songs. Children whispered it before bed, mothers said it over their cradles. It became a wish rather than a warning, to leave the world not in pain, but in peace so deep it resembles dreaming. Philosophers compared it to starlight, ancient light traveling for millennia, still visible long after its source has gone quiet. The kingdom, one wrote, is that light, not gone, simply too far away for time to reach, and perhaps that's true. Perhaps the frost did not kill them at all, but preserved them until the world grew gentle enough to deserve their return. Or maybe their sleep was not for themselves, but for us to show that peace can outlast every empire. The archaeologists eventually stopped their work, not from fatigue, but from humility. They realized there was nothing left to learn, only something to feel. They sealed the site, left flowers, and let the snow reclaim it once more. Let them dream, the chief curator said. They're better at it than we are. And so the valley remains as it was, white, still, tender. A sanctuary for silence, a lesson written in frost. Not a warning, not a ghost story, but an answer to a question we've asked since the beginning. What does rest look like when the world stops needing us? Perhaps it looks like this, an entire kingdom, hearts aligned with the rhythm of snow, bodies folded into peace. A world that refused to crumble and chose to rest instead. The sleep that spared them did not take, it gave. It gave back wonder and stillness, and the courage to imagine endings not as walls, but as doors softly closing on light. And if you listen closely beneath the hush of your own breath tonight, you might hear it, the sound of that same sleep passing gently through time, blessing everything it touches. When the long winter finally began to loosen its grip, no one was there to see the first thaw. The kingdom still slept beneath its glassy shroud, the air still cold enough to keep memory frozen. But nature remembers even when history forgets. Deep within the cracks of the ice, a seed, the same kind found clutched in the queen's hand, stirred. It began with a pulse. Not a sound, not a movement, but the faintest shift, warmth, threading through cold like breath, returning to lungs. The seed cracked softly, its shell yielding to a new season it could not name, and from that small fracture, a tendril of green reached upward into centuries of silence. By the time the explorers returned in early spring, the snow had receded from the lower slopes. They found patches of ground-breathing steam, water trickling in quiet threads. The valley no longer felt eternal, it felt patient. At the foot of the great hall, just beneath the queen's window, they saw it, a single flower blooming through the frost. Its petals were pale gold at the edges, fading to blue at the heart, glowing faintly under dawn light. It was unlike any known species. Botanists described it as a memory in bloom. The discovery changed everything. Scientists analyzed its cells and found traces of both ancient DNA and new mutations, as though time itself had collaborated with the soil. The flower carried the past within its roots and the future within its pollen. News spread quickly, and people came from distant lands just to see it. They stood in silence before the bloom, afraid to speak too loudly. "It feels alive," one visitor said, "like it's listening." Another whispered, "Maybe it's their dream flowering." For months, that single blossom stood alone against the thaw. It bent but did not break, swaying gently in winds that once carried only frost. Birds began to return. Moss crept over stone. The river beneath the ice sang louder, carrying fragments of warmth downstream. The valley was waking, not suddenly, but softly, like a body stretching after a long sleep. Artists painted the flower into every retelling of the legend. Poets called it the Queen's Promise, a symbol of patience, rebirth, and love that outlasts centuries. To many, it became proof that life is stubborn, that beauty can outlive silence. Even now, the flower blooms only once a year, never more, never less. It opens at dawn under the same pale light that once refused to rise. Some say if you stand close enough, you can hear it hum, a faint resonance, like the kingdom's last lullaby turned into color. And perhaps that's what it truly is, not rebirth, but continuation. The frost did not win. It simply waited until gentleness returned. The earth, like the people it sheltered, learned to rest and then to breathe again. If you ever find yourself there when the flower opens, don't touch it. Just watch, because some miracles are not meant to be taken, only witnessed, as proof that silence, too, can blossom. The story of the sleeping kingdom ends where it began, in silence, in snow, in the breath between one age and another. But this time, the silence is no longer heavy. It hums. The frost no longer feels like a tomb. It feels like a veil drawn gently over something sacred. The kingdom has not awakened, it simply rests, content in its dream. At dusk, the valley glows with soft color, pink fading to amber, amber to blue. The melted rivers whisper below the surface, carrying fragments of the past downstream. The single flower bends lightly in the breeze, releasing its scent into the evening. The air tastes of renewal, of endings done kindly. When night returns, it does not arrive as darkness. It comes as comfort. The stars rise, not cold but compassionate, leaning low as if to listen. The mountain exhales one long, slow breath, and the snow shivers not in fear, but in recognition. Somewhere beneath that stillness, the people remain not gone, not lost, only quiet. Their bodies, now part of the soil, lend warmth to roots and streams. Their dreams ripple through the valley like unseen firelight. They do not need to wake, because their rest has become the rhythm of the earth. The historians and poets who visit now understand that the kingdom does not belong to the past. It exists in the present, in every pause, every hush, every act of patience. When we stop rushing, when we breathe without demand, we join them. For a moment, We too sleep with open eyes. At night, travelers still camp near the river. They speak softly and light small fires. Sometimes, as the wind moves through the ruins, the bells hum faintly again, not as mourning, but as song. The air fills with peace so deep it feels infinite, and those who hear it find themselves whispering thank you, though they don't know to whom. The queen's crown remains sealed in frost by her window. The candle beside it never burned, yet its wick still gleams with quiet promise. Scholars have stopped trying to explain it. Some things they've learned don't need explanation to be true. Maybe that's the lesson the kingdom left behind, that the world does not always end in ruin. Sometimes it ends in rest. Sometimes the night doesn't need to end, because it has already learned how to hold light within itself. When you close your eyes tonight, think of that valley, the snow, the hush, the river's hum. Let it settle into your breathing. Let it remind you that time can be gentle, that endings can feel like warmth returning. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear it, the last line of the oldest lullaby. We are not gone, we are remembered. The stars keep watch. The frost keeps time. The night never ends because it no longer needs to.